This episode, I'm joined by Western Esotericism scholar Chris Giudice to discuss the work of Kenneth Grant. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my paying patrons and subscribers for making all of this work possible, and if you'd like to support the podcast and keep everything running, please find links in the description below. Otherwise, please enjoy. So, Chris Giudice, thanks very much for joining us on Magick's podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are going to be discussing the work of Kenneth Grant and the Typhonian tradition. If people know Grant's work, they'll know him biographically as the secretary of Aleister Crowley, and then I guess in a literary sense, if they have read him, it would most likely be the Magical Revival, and then maybe also the fact that he was sort of a promoter of Osmond Spare as well, which is sort of a key element of his work. But and also the connection to Lovecraft as well. But we'll be getting into all these things. But before we do so, before we get into the weeds of Grant, Lovecraft, Magick, Crowley, all this lovely stuff, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. What it is you do, and you have sort of a long history of writing things on Grant and then writing papers on Grant.
Yeah. Basically, it started in when I started my MA at Exeter University. I was one of the few lucky people who actually got to do that master's, because it wasn't alive for a long time. And the head of the program was Nicholas Goodrick-Clarke, who is an academic legend in his own right. He wrote The Occult Roots of Nazism is his most popular book. And there was this 2-year master's program which covered everything really from Renaissance magic, Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, and Agrippa, all the way to 20th century. Although Nicholas wasn't too keen on 20th century occultism, he preferred the kind of more highbrow, kind of earlier stuff. So my interest in an academic approach to the subject started off then. So it would have been 2007. But I had begun reading Grant in, I think it was late 90s or early 2000s. They were way too early for my own good. So I've been I was in academia until 2016, when I finished my Ph.D. And I still, to this day, go to the odd conference and write the odd paper, and I'm always focusing on 20th century. So when it comes to Thelema or Thelemic, the Thelemic milieu in general, I think Crowley has become a very overcrowded figure. And there's a lot of people, luckily, writing about various aspects of Crowley which have been neglected until now in a very kind of erudite and academic way. I've been interested in Grant more than Crowley for quite a bit now, and so I'm happy to be able to write about him.
You mentioned that Crowley's overcrowded. What do you mean? Can you care to expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think there was a very long period within academia, and I'm talking until probably the early 2000s, when you really wouldn't want to write on this kind of stuff. Then you have, because there were kind of higher and more respectable kind of occultists or followers of the Western esoteric tradition, if we want to go back, to the 1600s and 1700s. But things started changing in early 2000s, which is kind of when I got involved with the academic milieu, especially with the publication of Marco Palsi's Aleister Crowley and the Temptation of Politics, which is a pretty awesome book. and it's been translated. It actually came out in Italian because it was his thesis, and it's been translated in German and English, I think. And it was really kind of a breath of fresh air to read something about Crowley that wasn't kind of sensationalist and was, very accurate and based on research and facts. And then Henrik Bogdan edited a book published by Oxford University Press on Aleister Crowley and Western Esotericism, and that kind of opened the floodgates to Crowley studies within the wider framework of Western Esotericism. And so you have loads of scholars, and by loads of scholars, I mean, I'm obviously talking about like 10, 15, but within the kind of tiny milieu of Western Esotericism, it's a lot of people writing on different aspects of Crowley's influence, which obviously has been massive, and I'm very happy for every book that comes out. But at the same time, it's kind of nice, at least for me, to kind of delve into uncharted territories and write about stuff that hasn't really been covered yet. That I did that with my PhD when I basically wrote about occultism and secret societies during the fascist regime, which is kind of a counterpart to Nicholas's book on to the occult roots of Nazism. But also in the case of what we're talking about today, about Kenneth Grant. So while I was doing my MA, I actually asked Nicholas if I could write my MA dissertation on Kenneth Grant. And at first he said no. He didn't want me to waste my career on, I think he called it petty chaos magic, which kind of, which showed that he wasn't kind of a real expert on the subject. But then he actually agreed, and at the end, when he read the whole thing, he was really enthusiastic about it, and kind of was really happy that he had given me the chance to write that. And obviously, to write that MA thesis, I had to reread all of the trilogies multiple times, which kind of took a toll on my sanity. But
did you still? I mean, often the case. Did you still sort of love his work after that? Because often the case is when you write something on your masters, it makes you almost, or you do whatever you write your masters or your PhD on, you sort of go back and look at it, and it makes you feel sick. So do you still dip into his work now, I assume?
Yep. No, I do. He's really one of the few that I've written extensively on that I actually go back to, and every time there's something new that I hadn't kind of thought about before. And I think it's because he really kind of tends to write in a really layered way. And so if you read it and you're at the beginning of your, occult trajectory, academic or not, then you're going to understand, let's say, a small percentage of what Grant's writing about. But, the longer the time passes and the more you kind of are on this journey, the more things will appear obvious, and you'll be like, I wasn't expecting to find this concept explained here, albeit in a very kind of weird way. But that is kind of what happens with me with Grant. And I mean, it's not easy reading, but I definitely go back to it.
So there's one thing I want to touch upon about what you said just before we, sort of delaying our talk on Grant a little bit here, but it is tangential, because you mentioned, this attitude towards Crowley. And in a recent talk with John Michael Gray, who I'm sure you're aware of his work, he often has this thing about Crowley where he says, I finally got him to admit to why he dislikes Crowley so much, or dislikes him a fair amount. And he basically said that for a certain point in history, there was this conflation that, occultism in general is like, it's all basically Aleister Crowley, and he overshadowed so many other figures that were in the further past, those sort of highbrow figures that we were talking about. But he also overshadowed a lot of his day. And also, and this is from Greer, his popularity actually, Greer explicitly says his popularity and his popularization was down really to two figures, one of which was Kenneth Grant and the other being Grady McMurtry. And I just wondered if you were, somewhat how you feel about that, as Crowley is this often sort of quite overbearing figure, even though the history of occultism, really, for those who get deep, is one of two words, sharing and plagiarism. I think they're intimate.
Absolutely. Well, I have no qualms with Crowley. I don't dislike him as a figure. I don't really have any issue at all. I think he was one of the greatest synthesizers of 19th century occultism, and maybe for the day he was a bit ahead of his time. And so the biggest vogue back in the day was probably Theosophy. I'm talking early 20th century. And I think Theosophy and Thelema, or Blavatsky and Crowley, let's put it, Blavatsky and Crowley probably is a better way to put it. They were two fundamental figures, even though no one really talks about Blavatsky today. But I mean, the impact it had on almost anything, like art, music, visual arts, politics, eugenics, religion, every aspect was informed by what Blavatsky and other minor theosophists had written. And so you have kind of the first half of the 20th century, I think, well, at least until the Second World War, where a lot of stuff is actually influenced by Blavatsky. Then from the 60s onwards, you have this kind of rebel, kind of Dionysian figure that is Aleister Crowley, which incarnated the spirit of the age way better than, good old Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And so you have, you have music referencing Crowley. You have, directors like Kenneth Anger making movies that are explicitly derived from Crowley's ideas. And I think it's, more or less inevitable, really, that someone who was in many ways like a precursor and a rebel against the norms of his day would be celebrated by 60s and 70s kind of counterculture. And so nowadays we more or less have the same, although with the internet, with the advent of the internet and everything, it's kind of easier to see where people have been picking and choosing, and I don't know. I wouldn't say plagiarizing, because I don't know, but yeah, you know what I mean. It's we know where they got their stuff from, and so it's not so amazing and awe-inspiring anymore. But I think that both these figures are just incredible, and what they did kind of influenced everything that we have nowadays. In the world of occultism.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the reason I want to focused a fair bit there on Crowley is, I mean, Kenneth Grant's biography and life and work is really not detachable from that of Crowley. And it was interesting, because I wanted to know, as I often do, more about Grant as a figure. So I asked you, has there been a biography produced? And you said, well, no, because such a thing would be really boring. Fairly boring. It would be, home pub, maybe some classes or whatever it might be. And so that leads me to the question, I mean, who was this guy, Kenneth Grant? And I think I guess maybe the most important biographical event for our talk is him meeting Crowley. I think he was 21 or even younger.
Yeah, 21. Yeah. 21. Basically, he met Crowley a couple of years before Crowley's death, and I think it was 45, and he'd bought Magick in Theory and Practice by Crowley at Watkins bookshop, and was really interested in what he'd read. So he'd gone kind of to pester Watkins and to ask him to give him Crowley's address so that he could actually, write a letter to Crowley. And obviously Crowley was, at the end of his occult career, at the end of his life, he was in Netherwood in Hastings. And so he was in this boarding house, really not really having kind of an active social life, even though a few people still pass by to visit. So getting a letter from this very, very young guy obviously excited Crowley, because he felt like he had still lots of things that he could pass on to like a younger generation. And so for a brief while, Kenneth Grant acted as Crowley's secretary. That was until Grant's father, who was a clergyman, he kind of realized that Grant was really up to no good, and wasn't too happy about this, and forbade Grant to visit Crowley or see him again. So when they kind of separated on a professional level, they never saw each other, even though Grant did go to Crowley's funeral in 1947. He'd recently gotten married with his wife Steffi, so the two of them were in Hastings for the funeral. But in those 2 very brief years, Crowley had a massive influence on Crowley, and lots of times in Grant's recollections, he would be at Crowley's and he would be like manually copying or typing out manuscripts by Crowley, magical instructions or recollections, diary entries, whatever, while he received guests and stuff. He would be there kind of frantically copying and trying to preserve, what could be preserved, and so the reason why we do have a wealth of material by Crowley today is also because of the work that Grant did in those 2 years. But it wasn't only secretarial work. I mean, he also managed to become really interested in Thelema, and I think wholeheartedly embraced Thelema as a way of life and as a philosophy / religion. And Crowley kind of realized the value that Grant had. In one of his final letters to the future head of the OTO, he basically wrote to him, utility of Grant, if I die, he would make a great head of the OTO in the UK. And so this was a letter to Carl Germer, who then became the head of the OTO when Crowley died. So I think it was kind of mutually beneficial in that it kind of pleased Crowley to be able to still talk about magic and impart his teachings to someone who was really interested. And obviously Kenneth Grant had kind of just right at the end of Crowley's life found someone that could teach him something. And of course Grant was quite quick at learning, and he realized pretty soon that there were areas in which Crowley was like sorely lacking, one of them being Tantra. And so very, very quickly kind of Grant sussed him out and kind of realized that Crowley didn't really have the huge knowledge on Tantra that was implied. But Crowley made no qualms about that and kind of referred him to Curwen, who was another member of the OTO and much more knowledgeable in Tantra than Crowley was. So he kind of was very honest about that with Grant. And of course, Crowley gave Grant the Lamb painting, which we're probably going to talk about later on when we talk about aliens and extra-dimensional entities in Grant's writings and in Grant's life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So was Grant interested in occultism prior to Crowley, or was it sort of like reading various things and not really getting anything that was really sticking?
At that early age, I wouldn't know, but he was always interested in Eastern doctrines, and he wanted to join the army and be stationed in the East so that he could learn more about these ideas. And at one point, he was really interested in the non-duality ideas they found in Rama Maharshi's Vedanta, and he wrote about Vedanta and its tenets in quite a few articles, which have been published together in a volume called At the Feet of the Guru. So that was something that he was really into. But I think the first kind of taste of like real occultism came with his purchase of Magick in Theory and Practice.
Okay, so we could probably begin to start piecing his, because he has a very distinct and unique work of his own throughout all of the Typhonian Trilogies in his own books. So we have Thelema, but as I understand from your own master's thesis on Grant and from Grant's own work, it's Thelema, but with this, even though there is an emphasis on Egypt and set somewhere within Thelema, more so, Grant really hones in on this. And then we also have the Eastern stuff coming through. So how does this, what does this lineage look like, and how does this magical, to put it roughly, worldview begin to build?
Right. Okay. So I think the most useful thing we can do without kind of losing ourselves along the way is to kind of trace the ideas behind the Typhonian tradition and how he got to the concept of a Typhonian tradition. Mm-hmm. One of Grant's biggest influences was an Egyptologist, a self-styled Egyptologist. He never actually left Britain, never visited Egypt, and so his actual knowledge of Egyptology is kind of debatable. And we're talking about Gerald Massey, obviously, who is actually hugely influential. He was an influence on Crowley. Crowley talks about him in Magick in Theory and Practice when talking about ancient Egypt and talking about ancient Sumer. And he's talking about Iris, his holy guardian angel, and the fact that he came from ancient Sumer. And he kind of starts talking about the Yazidi. And he's like, well, if you want to know more about this, though, kind of go and read this guy, Richard Payne Knight, other people. And he included Gerald Massey in the mix. And so maybe that's where Grant got it from. But basically, Grant developed a theory. What Grant did was basically try to include Crowley within a pre-existing tradition, so that he could actually kind of explain and include other occultists that he enjoyed and that he admired into the same tradition, leaving a position of preeminence to Crowley, but not keeping Crowley as kind of the sole master, the sole kind of informant of his kind of occult vision. So through the writings of Gerald Massey, Grant posited that there was a time back in ancient Egypt and even more south in Africa where the occult tradition actually started. And it's kind of an Afrocentric, we could say, theory of the kind of the birth of an occult tradition. And the occult tradition was represented initially by Typhon and her son Set, which kind of had their counterparts in the Ursa Major and Sirius in the sky. And the idea being that the kind of reproductive faculties back in the day were basically ascribed to women, because the kind of generative power of sperm wasn't known. So the woman was celebrated as life giver, and so it was kind of a Bachophenian age, which probably we could put in line with Crowley's Aeon of Isis, and then obviously with the discovery of the generative power of semen, an Osirian faction, a kind of solar phallic faction, in opposition of a more chthonic nocturnal faction that was represented by Typhon and Set, was born. And according to Massey and according to Grant, there was like a massive rift between these two factions, with a dispersion of the Typhonian tradition in other parts of the Mediterranean. And that's how we basically got different occult traditions in several parts of the Mediterranean, which kind of aligned themselves loosely with what was called the Typhonian tradition, and what would kind of culminate into Crowley's ideas. So, I mean, we do get this in a lot of thinkers, not only occult thinkers. I quoted Bachofen earlier on. We have a lot of thinkers and philosophers and occultists who kind of are more in line with kind of solar phallic option and worship, while we have others who are kind of more towards a primordial feminine chthonic kind of approach to magic and occultism. And funnily enough, Crowley would probably be inserted into the solar phallic one, just because of his, obvious worship of both the sun and the phallus. So, but in Grant's tradition, basically, he is kind of firmly planted within the Typhonian tradition.
I mean, I have to ask, because I know he's someone that you also admire. I mean, would this Typhonian tradition, in the sense of that feminine reproductivity, it seems rather cosmic, it seems rather Clarkesian. Would you say there's a connection from Typhon and Set to Eros, or would that be getting a bit too abstract?
Well, without getting too abstract, I think there's lots of similar ideas. I mean, the fact that Clarkes's Eros does advocate for a more kind of primordial approach to nature and to the cosmos, and the fact that chthonic ideas, nocturnal living, are so central to Clarkes's philosophy. I don't think that's a stretch at all. Whether we can equate Eros with Typhon or Set, that would probably be getting too abstract. But definitely, I definitely think that even in the 20th century, there was kind of a very sharp distinction between these two philosophies. Like, for example, if we want to place Clarkes on the kind of feminine chthonic nocturnal tradition, we have other occultists and philosophers like Julius Evola, which were kind of firmly in the solar Hyperborean tradition, and who actually kind of mocked his fellow Italian occultists, because everyone else more or less kind of belonged to this kind of more chthonic, primordial, nocturnal tradition, because in Italian occultism, loads of ideas have been borrowed by Egyptian traditions. Hence, kind of the similarity of the Typhonian ideas with those of some Italian thinkers of the early 20th century. So I think it's something that kind of is still present there today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, in risk of somewhat repeating myself, we have the occult and perhaps historical foundation of where the beliefs, forces are coming from for this Typhonian tradition. But what does this Typhonian tradition look like in practice? And I guess that there's a difference here, in the fact we're moving solar, horizontal, phallic, up and down. It's completely found its home in the modern world. It's a very easy way to think about things in a way. And I think with the chthonic, and I wouldn't even say horizontal for chthonic, it's a dispersion, a leaning into. But with this, I the reason I'm sort of stuttering a bit here is there's a difficulty of talking about directionality, of trajectory, right? So when I say, like, what does the Typhonian tradition look like in practice? It's very difficult to say, like, oh, we're going over there. It seems like there isn't so much as a teleology as something maybe more cyclic, maybe more, it builds and flows, and more like this. So I'm just sort of, I don't want to risk saying, where was Grant going exactly with his practice? What was the exact goals of the Typhonian tradition, etc.?
I get you, because it's kind of hard to, when we're talking directionality, of kind of trying to apply that on Grant, because you get rituals that he performed in the 50s and early 60s when his Nuit-Isis lodge was operative in London, which are very, very kind of catabatic and chthonic and very influenced by some works of Lovecraft and other authors. But at the same time, being influenced by Lovecraft also means that you're not going upwards. You're going beyond the upwards. You're going actually beyond the solar system. And at a certain point, Grant was very much influenced by the ideas of one Frater Achard, who had been, for a time, one of Crowley's prize students, who had basically posited that Crowley's Aeon of Horus had ended and the Aeon of Mart, the goddess of justice, had started. And
sorry, just to stop you there, what does that difference entail? What does that movement entail?
Oh, okay. So yeah, you're right. So basically, in 1904, Crowley had this revelation that he wrote down in what is today called the Book of the Law, and it's basically very similar to what Joachim of Fiore or other Christian mystics posited, like the three ages, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or, different divisions of time, and so more of a kind of teleological understanding of history. And Crowley, of course, divided history in three major distinctions: the Aeon of Isis, which was kind of the matriarchal period that probably Bachofen alludes to in his works, that probably Grant alluded to in the beginning with the Afrocentric origins of the occult tradition. And then we have the Aeon of Osiris, which is, of course, the Aeon of the dying gods, the dying and resurrecting gods. So, we have Christianity, we have Attis, we have Dionysus, we have Osiris. And then, of course, with Crowley, who was the prophet of the new Aeon, we have kind of this new age in which every man and every woman with the proper teaching and the proper understanding could have actually forged their own path, kind of following their own will. And I think that's pretty central in Crowley. And but one of his students, Achard, had basically posited straight after Crowley's death, because I think he didn't dare do it while Crowley was alive. So in 1948, Achard had kind of said that the Aeon of Mart had started. And so it was kind of a double Aeon, sort of. And so like Horus and Mart were kind of doubly governing this time kind of together. And Crowley had written about the Aeon of Mart, that it was supposed to come, but he didn't know when, because time in those spaces is different than time in this world. So we already have with Crowley kind of an opening to celestial intelligences in which kind of time flows differently. And I think this is one of the things that really excited Grant a lot. And the fact that Crowley considered these beings that helped humanity, so people's holy guardian angels, to be actual beings, super celestial intelligences that lived in a kind of different dimension to ours, in which time flowed in a different way.
Outside the circles of time. It's a very good segue to my next question. Well, there's two questions there, actually. I mean, in what sense, and it's probably a very difficult question, but in what sense does time work for Grant? But also just to bring in, which will lead us then into the later question on aliens and Lam, or Lamb, I'm not sure how to, and Iwas as well. But this notion of them, they are definite beings, but when it's sort of one of the more humorous, I guess, linguistic problems with Crowley when he's writing about holy guardian angels is most people know about that tradition from the Christian church where every single person has a holy guardian angel. But when we begin to talk about these as beings, it sort of opens up as to what exactly these beings are. And this also has a relationship with time. So I guess to begin with time, which you were going into there, but how exactly does this work?
Well, it's kind of easy and hard to answer this question. The easy way to answer it is that in Night Side of Eden, which I think is one of Grant's best works, he actually posits the existence of 6 eons as representing a full life cycle. So Eon number 0, 1, and 2, he doesn't tell us much about. They're way before our time, and not much can be said about that. And so 3, 4, and 5 are Crowley's eons, so we can kind of get a rough idea of what they represent by reading Crowley. And then you have Eon number 6, which is the Aeon of Mart, and that's kind of what Grant devotes the whole of Outside the Circles of Time to. Kind of the arrival of this balancing force at the end of this cycle of time. It's very much, it's very similar in a way to the idea of yugas in the East, without the kind of negative connotations of the later yugas. Like everything is kind of taken at face value by Grant. So the kind of destructive forces of the Aeon of Horus are kind of balanced by the Aeon of Mart, just because it's that the natural way of things. So there's no kind of moral judgment of like debasement of life and times. So there's this idea of like these huge cycles of time, but there's also this idea of contact with entities for which time is nothing. So you have these kind of two ideas floating around there, which really kind of are the core ideas at the bottom of Outside the Circles of Time.
Would you say it's those beings outside of time that the Typhonian tradition is, in some sense, trying to communicate with?
I think the idea behind these beings outside of circles of time, are an attempt to explain the spiritual advancement or the manner in which humans have advanced spiritually from the beginning of, let's say, this great cycle to where Grant was when he was writing about it. So, when he started writing the Magical Revival in 1972, that was kind of right in the middle of the UFO mania. So it's kind of pretty obvious that he would have been influenced by that kind of literature. And also, if we put that next to the Lovecraftian influences, so, beings that live so far away and so detached from our lives, that time really doesn't matter, doesn't really kind of work on them. They're actually outside circles of time. They're not part of this great cycle. So there's these beings in that kind of contact humanity or humanity contacts. It kind of depends. That are there and are kind of always there. And I brought in the UFOs because kind of early on in his career, Grant kind of developed this idea that there were trans-Plutonian communications arriving from outside, beyond Pluto, and he kind of thought about this planet called Nuit, like the character described in Crowley's Book of the Law in the first chapter of the Book of the Law. So he kind of posited the existence of this planet, Nuit or Nuit-Isis in later works, that kind of could be contacted and could send instructions and teachings through elaborate rituals, which apparently kind of happened during the existence of the Nuit-Isis Lodge, which Grant had created in 55, and it was open until 62. Of course, Orthodox Thelemites such as Karl Gomer, who was then the head of the OTO, didn't really take that well, and they expelled Grant from the OTO. But he obviously carried on as if nothing had happened, because he was pretty much sure that he was in the right, and he'd received these transmissions which checked out, and he just basically carried on for the rest of his life, really analyzing these transmissions, which have been kind of written down in the Book of Silber and Liberoc Bish, the Book of the Spider. And so, it's kind of, he made it pretty clear that these intelligences could be contacted, and were actually willing to help kind of those who contacted them advance in a spiritual way.
And they very much were real beings. These aren't, Jungian archetypes or things of the mind. These were real beings for Grant.
Well, that's kind of the whole. I think that's the biggest point of contention when one analyzes Grant's works. When I was, I think my favorite Grant book, Hecate's Fountain, is very much the best book you can consult if you want a taste of the rituals which took place, which allegedly took place, during the meetings of the Nuit-Isis Lodge, and so they were very much informed by what the group was reading back in the day. So, obviously Lovecraft, but they were also informed by Sax Rohmer and novel Dope. I don't know if you've ever read that, but a lot of people in the Nuit-Isis Lodge had read that. So, in order to kind of stimulate their minds and kind of bring a kind of derailment of the senses, Grant had decided to use certain elements of Lovecraft's fiction and of Rohmer's fiction. And if you read about the rituals, it's pretty crazy, because you have, tentacles coming out of nowhere and kind of probing the priestess, and things kind of really, really going terribly wrong, and crazy things happening, actually happening, manifesting. So it's, if you take that at face value and you're like, okay, that actually did happen, that could be one way of seeing it. Another way of seeing it is, I was interviewing a former student of Grant's from the 70s called Mike Magee. And he's very much always been interested in Oriental philosophy and Tantra, and studying those texts. And that's kind of the reason why he left the Typhonian Order to begin with. He really wanted to kind of focus on that aspect, and Grant was kind of happy for him to do so. And I interviewed him for my MA thesis, and basically Grant had told him, according to Magee, that the trilogies were basically exercise in fiction, which were kind of aimed at arriving at a kind of derangement of the senses, which would fine-tune and heighten the senses of the reader so that he could actually have magical experience in more easily, let's say. Mm-hmm. So there's these two different ways of approaching Grant's trilogies, really. And personally, this is my opinion from a very non-academic standpoint. I actually find that Grant's novellas, Grant's fiction, is actually where Grant talks more clearly about his magic and about like practical stuff. Mm-hmm. And his trilogies, which are supposed to be kind of, occult instruction manuals, are instead, as Magee said, an exercise in fiction. Mm. So I kind of tend to concur. And I think that there's a lot to be gleaned from Grant's novellas, which have kind of never really been talked about or written about in a serious way.
So where does Lamb and aliens play into this? I mean, we've sort of spoken about these Lovecraftian entities. Are these all somewhat of the same plane of being, or is there other things going on there?
So right at the beginning of the Magical Revival, you've read it, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You have like the very first table. I think it's within the first 10 pages. You have this kind of graph equating aspects of Thelema with aspects of what we would call today the Necronomicon Gnosis, or the kind of the occult parts of Lovecraft's writing. And of course, you have like descriptions of these beings kind of manifesting in the temple of the Nuit-Isis Lodge, etc. But at the same time, you have aspects such as that of Lamb, which are kind of less, I would say, less tangible and less kind of obvious in their link to occult knowledge. As I was saying before, Crowley in his last few years, one day basically told Grant that he could choose any of his paintings any of Crowley's paintings, and he could take it home for free. And so Grant kind of went through all of the paintings that Crowley had sketched out and everything, and decided to get this to bring home the figure of Lamb, which is very much similar to what in the late 60s would kind of be called greys, grey aliens, with this kind of big head and kind of small eyes. And so it's a pretty weird. I've had the pleasure of and the honor of actually seeing it live, and it's really, really weird, and there's something about it that just that's just kind of eerie enough kind of to put you off a bit. But I think that the contact with entities kind of beyond like Transplutonian entities aren't really kind of, let's kind of do a ritual and get in touch with Yog-Sothoth and see what he is, he's up to and what he can tell me. But it's more a kind of becoming receptive to certain signals and certain messages kind of coming. So in a way, of course, the Lovecraft influence is like massive, but in another way, when you get books like The Dawn of the Magicians, or books by Vallée, who is one of the most popular authors on UFO theories in the late 60s and early 70s, you have this kind of influence on Grant of these creatures who can basically help out humanity, and they're there to kind of are there to help out and to kind of communicate certain tidbits of knowledge, kind of to help those who contact them to kind of further their spiritual advancement. So there's a bit of a difference between what kind of someone might think, although there are kind of orders that have been kind of created which do practice kind of Lovecraftian magic, derived from, I guess, chaos magic and that kind of strand. But I mean, if you do read Outside the Circle of Time, which is really where the alien kind of idea is first put forth, it's kind of not as Lovecraftian and scary as you might think. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like Grant tries to explain it in a kind of quasi scientific way, or as much as possible. Like he talks about when MacGregor Mathers of the Golden Dawn had actually met the secret chiefs vis-a-vis. He had, nosebleeds and blood coming out of his ears, etc., etc. And Blavatsky had same kind of thing happen to her when she met her Mahatmas. So basically, Grant basically said, the same thing happens to people who are contacted by aliens. So, we can actually think that, these encounters are probably kind of similar, only that Mathers and Blavatsky knew what they were facing, while normal people probably didn't. But the physical effects were kind of similar. So the spiritual effects could have been similar if they had known, So there is this kind of quasi scientific approach to the thing, which I find really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Crowley would, the split between sort of Germer and Grant? Do you think Crowley, if he would fantastically still been around, he would have said, Grant, you're on the right path?
Nah.
No?
Nah, I don't think so. No. There's, I think when you were talking before about Greer talking about Crowley, I think what Greer was talking about is like what now is called like the cult of Crowley, or what Crowley himself called Crowleyanity. And so we're talking about the cult of Crowley, we're not talking about Thelema. So I don't think there's enough Crowley in the trilogies to satisfy Crowley's ego. And had he been alive, he would have said, "What are you talking about? These people are just authors. These people are just writing books, and this is real magic. Don't mess around with it." Well, what Grant did was kind of mix UFOs with Tantra, sex magic, and Egyptology, Egyptosophy, Golden Dawn, Thelema, of course, and Crowley always has this position of preeminence. I mean, like he always does in all 9 books. But he's not the only one. He's not alone. So I don't think he would have appreciated that.
Well, you mentioned at the start as well, the one place of clear critique in Grant is Tantra. So what does Crowley get wrong? Or does he just not know?
No, I think basically what Crowley gets wrong is, you can't really blame Crowley for that, because what Crowley kind of learned about Tantra, he learned from Westerners. And so basically you have the Western Tantra, he learned from people like the early founders of the OTO. So the OTO, like pre-Crowley OTO, like Elner or Royce or Hartman, the people who actually founded the OTO, and they basically all talked about Tantra and its kind of sexual element. But and they wrote about it and published books about it. So it was, it was something that they believed they knew a lot about. what is actually being proven by quite a few scholars, especially Gordon Giudice, who wrote a beautiful book called Crowley, India and the Occult, or India and the Occult. And there's a chapter on Crowley and one on Grant. Anyway, it's a Routledge book, and it's by Giudice, and I think it's called India and the Occult. But it has a chapter on Crowley and a chapter on Grant, and it kind of tries to see, what's what, and where these people could have kind of gotten their knowledge from. So that's the idea. And when it comes to sex magic, I kind of want to make it brief and as concise as possible. You would have in the OTO, you would have like the 8th degree OTO, which was basically masturbatory magic. Mm-hmm. And then you have the 9th degree OTO, which would be heterosexual magic. Mm-hmm. And then you would have, created by Crowley, the 11th degree, which would be homosexual magic. Mm-hmm. So Grant doesn't have this. Like in Grant's system, woman has a much more central place in that, okay, you have the 8th degree, usual. Then you have the 9th degree, which is heterosexual intercourse. And then you have 11th degree, which is heterosexual intercourse while the woman is menstruating, because that's where Grant thought that the magical vibrations, or kalas, as he calls them, actually kind of flowed from. So the kind of best kind of sex magic was actually that, and he equates that to the Oriental idea of Maithuna, and so makes it kind of much more spiritual and less kind of goal oriented than Crowley's sex magic was, which was kind of performed for, money or success or, this and that. And I'm really kind of synthesizing to the extreme here because I know that we've been on for quite a bit and I hate to ramble on.
No, not at all.
But yeah, that's kind of like one big thing. And one of the people who knew about Tantra most was this furrier called Joseph Curwen. He was at 9th degree OTO back in the day when Crowley was still alive, and that's the person Crowley directed Grant to. And he basically told him, like, look, if you want to learn Tantra, I'll admit to you, I'm not the top person to kind of ask about Tantra, so go to him. And Curwen had written a commentary on this tantric text, and basically Grant quotes from this commentary a lot during his trilogies. So I think his knowledge about Tantra and about sex magic comes from there. Mm-hmm.
So, moving on from that, where do we see Grant's influence today?
It's, it's there. If you have the eyes to see it, it's there, seriously. Like, you can see it in comic book artists. Alan Moore is like a huge Grant fan. He's written a beautiful article on Kenneth Grant called Beyond Our Ken. I think you can find that online. Grant Morrison is another one who has been really kind of influenced by Grant. I don't know if you've ever read Nameless, but it's an amazing graphic novel, and it's as Grantian as it possibly can get, and the influence is like really, really clear. And you also get quite a bit of Grant in David Lynch and the 3rd season of Twin Peaks. There's a book, name escapes me. It could be A Simple History of Twin Peaks, but written by David Lynch and Mark Frost. And Mark Frost is the co-producer of Twin Peaks and was there, since the 1st season. And he, I think, has a bit of an obsession with Jack Parsons and like that whole kind of California scene of the OTO. But you can tell that he's read some Grant, because in the third season of Twin Peaks there are some reference to Morve and to certain aspects of kind of Grant's oeuvre, which kind of are not really kind of easily discernible. But if you read the book, and he talks about kind of, when he talks about the history of Twin Peaks, he talks about kind of the atomic bomb kind of opening kind of access points for these trans-Plutonian energies to come in. Grant said the exact same thing, because UFO sightings kind of started to become really too many to count from when Crowley died. So basically, that's what Grant said, after Crowley's death. Basically, his death kind of created this rift that kind of opened up planet Earth to these trans-Plutonian energies. And you get that in Frost as well. And so there's an episode in season 3 that starts with the atomic bomb exploding. It's in black and white. I can't remember what episode it is. I think could be 6, but I could be wrong. Yeah. Like the first 10 minutes are like silent, and it starts with this like atomic explosion, and you can find loads of reference on Grant in there if you kind of like know what to look for. So yeah, I mean, it's he's niche, but he's getting like bigger and bigger. And like Starfire Publishing, which are basically keeping the Grant books in print, I mean, they've just been constantly reprinting. And now they've been publishing the books in paperback, because they used to kind of go for a fortune back then. But nowadays you can really kind of buy every Grant book from the trilogies in paperback format, and I think that's really, really amazing. And more people can get into him, and it probably takes perseverance. I think I told you this the first time we spoke, that I actually thought that Magical Revival, when I finished the last page, I thought that it was an elaborate joke, and that someone had taken like a year of his life to actually kind of come up with complete nonsense just to see who would read the whole thing, and so yeah, it's hard to begin with if you don't know anything about Grant. But even Crowley is, when you start with Crowley.
Where would you advise people to begin with Grant?
I would tell them to read the trilogies in order. So start with the Magical Revival, but there's a fantastic book called The Servants of the Star and Snake. It's published by Starfire, and it's edited by Henrik Bogdan, who's another academic who's written extensively on both Kenneth and Steffi Grant. Most of the artwork in Grant's books is from Steffi's craftsmanship, and it's amazing art. So there's this book called Servants of the Star and Snake is kind of a primer for anyone wanting to dip their toes into Grantiana, and it kind of covers in self-contained chapters various strands of Grant's thought. So you get a chapter on Grant and Lovecraft, Grant and Massey, Grant and Crowley, Grant and the Typhonian tradition, Grant and UFOs, written by most, I think 50% academics and 50% occultists. So you kind of get a good mix in there, but it's all very clear. And when you kind of then go on to read Grant, I think it will make a difference. So definitely Magical Revival and Servants of the Star and Snake.
Okay. Well, I'll be sure to put the links for Starfire Publishing in the description below, because it's the one the place to go to get these books. But what are you working on now? Anything Grant related?
No, nothing Grant related at the moment. I'm actually, well, there is this idea that I'm kind of trying to pitch to some publishers, some academic publishers, which would be about Grant's influence on the CCRU in 90s, in the 90s at the University of Warwick, the philosophy department. So that would be something that I would love to write. Now, whether I can get a publisher for that is something completely different. But that is definitely something that I would want to write in the future. Especially, when you go into the whole kind of Cthulhu club, and there's kind of late writings by Nick Land, and which seem kind of highly informed, at least by Grant and Lovecraft. And at the moment, I'm actually writing another book on early 20th century occultism and magical communes. So I'm including Crowley's stint in Sicily at Cefalù with his magical commune there, and Giudice and his
Priory.
Fontainebleau Priory, and other American examples concerning spiritualism and theosophy.
Mm-hmm. That sounds fascinating. Wow, I'd love to talk to you when that book comes out, because
when that does come out, I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, it's been a great conversation, Chris. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.